Another significant factor you could consider also was in those days there was a lot of tropical illnesses, there was a lot of physiological illnesses that young boys and girls were going through, and so something like that was also very useful for them. So they served a multiple range of purposes. So Krishnamacharya had this opportunity to deal with all these teenagers. And what is the common thing with most teenagers? We have a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy that is present. So he thought about a way to teach yogasanas, because young people need to be doing yogasanas slightly differently from older people. Also because of the nature of the gunas. So he invented a system of sequencing postures into a dynamic sequence, what nowadays is known as the Vinyasa Krama. And he used again a reference, a classical reference from the Yoga Sutra philosophy to evolve this practice, and perhaps also be inspired by a technique which is very old in India called the Surya Namaskara, the sun salutation. So here the approach was that you reach a goal and then you come back to the same starting point. You reach a goal, come back to the same starting point. So this is how asanas were structured. There was a definite number of steps in a sequence, and most importantly, each of these sequences were done with a careful breath regulation. That's what makes the difference between doing yoga asanas in a physical way and doing yoga asanas in a way that is consistent with yoga. There is a lot of benefits for this as well. So this is when he started to teach these young boys and girls in this way, and this was the time when he published his first book called the Yoga Makaranda, where he demonstrates how different asanas had to be approached in a very carefully constructed sequence, so that the starting point and the finishing point is the same. This is what is called a mandala, an arrangement. So as you can see, you go from standing Samasthiti, which is here, all the way to Paschimottanasana here, that's the goal, and then you come back to the first position. This is how it was done. So whether it was a seated posture or an inverted posture like Sarvangasana, it almost always followed the same principle. But what is very keen about this is that every step was carefully coordinated with a breathing technique. So what were the benefits of this? The benefits was that every posture had a proper structure. This is perhaps the first time when asanas were structured into a manner that made some logical sense. And what this as a consequence did was also that it balanced the movement. When we say balance the movement, it balanced the movement of the spine. If you look at any of these sequences, the spine is moving once forward, once backward. There's always a balance, so that there is no overemphasis on one direction of the spine. That's why we said that there is a balance of movement. It increases the attention span of a young person, especially a teenager. It increases the attention span of young teenager. Also, it builds vitality in the young. This is very crucial, because if you take the science of yoga and Ayurveda, there is a concept called the three gunas. We have Vata, Pitta, Kapha in Ayurveda, we have Sattva, Rajas, Tamas in yoga. And among this, they say very clearly that when we are younger, the guna that is dominant is Kapha or Tamas. This is what is the dominant guna when we are young. That's why if you look at children, they are very chubby and cute, and you want to squeeze their cheeks, etc. So, but this body needs to be prepared for the next guna, which is Sattva or Pitta. So, this is another reason why this kind of sequences were done, and this kind of sequences were only taught to young people. It was not taught to older people like us, even normal adults. Particularly because our guna changes. By the time we hit our 23, 24, the guna starts to change. So if we continue the same way, it's not going to yield the same benefit. Perhaps the reason why this kind of yoga practice is quite popular nowadays is because perhaps in modern times we do not grow up. or we refuse to grow up. Perhaps this is another reason. But if you look at the body and its needs, this is a very strong point. The gunas change, therefore the practice has to change. This is what he strongly talks. He only taught young people in this way. The older people he did not teach this way. For example, some of you may have heard about a very famous yoga master called Indra Devi. She passed away some years ago. She was, I think, a Latvian who eventually settled down in Argentina. She was a student of Krishnamacharya at this time. She was, however, in her mid-30s when she met him. He did not teach her this way. However, the younger students he taught this way. Particularly, some of you may know certain teachers like B.K. Iyengar and Pattabi Joyce. These were young boys at this time. These two were young boys, teenage boys at this time. They were taught in this way. In fact, there are even some videos available, particularly of B.K. Iyengar in this era, because B.K. Iyengar was a family member. So particularly there is some videos where you can actually see Iyengar doing Ashtanga. So, but this was because he was a young boy at this time. He was a teenager. But as it is very clear in the message, the moment the gunas change, the kind of practice must change. And this is what happened to some people but not some others. So this era was ending in the 50s because in 1947 India became free of the British. In 1950 India became a republic. So the moment these two historical events happened, India became a government-controlled country rather than a king-controlled country. So the Mysore Maharaja started to lose his power and, more importantly, his control over money. So many of the cultural institutions that he had started funding had to be closed down, one of which was the Yoga Shala of Mysore. So in 1950s this was closed, and at this time Krishnamacharya was 62, usually a time to retire and relax. However, he had very young children at this time who had to be educated, who had to be provided for. So he had to start looking out for some jobs. So he was teaching briefly in a place called Bangalore, but also searching for other kind of opportunities. Very good opportunity came to him from a set of lawyers who framed the Indian Constitution, who were knowing Krishnamacharya, and they invited him to come to the city of Madras, Chennai.